Hello boys and girls, and maybe some older boys and girls. We have really missed you this past year, and especially when we began our services again on a Sunday in the church in September, we really missed you too. And so I couldn't let Christmas come without having a chat with you. And I was thinking what I would do tonight would be to tell you a story. We have shared lots of stories in church on Sunday mornings, and I thought tonight on Christmas Eve I would read to you one of my own stories. It was a very cold winter in the Scottish Highlands. Most winters were cold in the Scottish Highlands. In the small village of Talliskenny, Mr. Angus Macduff ran the local food shop with his wife May. In fact, their shop was the only shop in Talliskenny, and so it stocked lots of items as well as food. Now, Christmas was only a few weeks away, and so the Macduffs had stocked their shop to the rafters with lots of great things for Christmas. But they especially had stocked it with some marvellous cheese, because they knew that the villagers of Talliskenny liked cheese from all over the world, and so that's what they had done. As it was a very cold winter, the birds and the wild animals in and around Talliskenny were doing their very best to find shelter and food to see them through the winter. And one particular wee mouse was having a difficult time to find enough food to feed himself, and every time he tried to find shelter it always seemed as if he had been beaten to the best spots by the other animals. One night, however, the wee mouse found a way into Mr. Macduff's food store. Because mice, well, they don't need much space to get into places, and there was a wee space just beside the back door which took him into the shop. The wee mouse, he looked around at all the food in the shop, but he was most interested in all the cheese that was being kept in one of the fridges. The problem was, it was one of these fridges that had a heavy glass door which just couldn't be opened by such a small creature. As the wee mouse was looking up at the fridge, he heard an almighty scream. Mrs. Macduff had caught sight of the mouse, and she had let out such a large shout because she was scared of mice. Mr. Macduff, he rushed into the shop, and he saw what the problem was. He laughed out loud, and he told Mrs. Macduff not to be afraid. It was only a wee mouse. He would catch it and he would let it go outside. However, this wee mouse wasn't wanting to be caught, and so he scurried all over the shop with Mr. Macduff chasing him around the place. Mr. Macduff got out of puff very quickly. Well, he said, there's only one thing for it. He lifted up the shop's broom and set off again to catch the wee mouse. The wee mouse did get a fright when he saw Mr. Macduff chasing him with the broom, so he quickly ran out of the shop, but that meant he was out in the cold once again. Well, the next day there was a big storm in Talliskenny, and all the electric lines came down under the weight of the snow. Mr. and Mrs. Macduff had to put a portable gas fire into the shop to keep their customers and themselves warm. Well, that night, yes, the wee mouse came back to the shop as he was so very cold, and he hoped that, well, if he didn't get something to eat, at least he could just sleep in the shop, and maybe someone might have dropped a bit of cheese for him to eat. He very quietly went in by the hole, in at the back door once again, and everything was very still. There was no cheese on the floor, but there was a gas fire that was keeping the shop nice and warm. But the wee mouse didn't know that Mr. and Mrs. Macduff, they had actually gone to bed and forgotten to switch the fire off. As the wee mouse settled down for the night, he was glad to have shelter from the terrible weather outside. The wee mouse was enjoying a nice sleep, but he woke up very suddenly. He knew something was wrong, and it wasn't long before he realised what was wrong. Mr. Macduff had been dusting the shelves of the shop when a customer had come in, and he had put his cloth duster on top of the gas fire and forgotten all about it. The duster had fallen down into the gas fire during the night, and it had caught on fire. As the fire was beside the shelves, there was a real chance that the shelves were also going to catch fire. What was the wee mouse going to do? Well, he thought very quickly, and he remembered how Mr. Macduff had chased him round the shop with the broom. And then he thought of a great plan. He ran up the stairs to Mr. and Mrs. Macduff's bedroom, and he jumped right onto their bedclothes. He then squeaked at the top of his voice until Mr. and Mrs. Macduff woke up. Mrs. Macduff saw him and hid under the bedclothes, and Mr. Macduff, it was the middle of the night, he decided enough was enough. He leapt out of bed and chased the wee mouse all the way back down into the shop, where he saw that the fire was about to take hold on the shelves. Well, Mr. Macduff quickly put the fire out, and then he breathed a heavy sigh of relief, and he looked round for the wee mouse who had warned him about the danger. But the wee mouse was nowhere to be seen. He very soon realised that the wee mouse had come up to the bedroom to warn him about the fire. The next day, P.C. Bruce, the local police officer, came into the shop to buy his newspaper. Mr. Macduff told him all about the previous evening, about how he had forgotten to turn off the fire, the policeman tutted, and then about the duster that had caught fire and then nearly set the shop alight. He then told P.C. Bruce about the wee mouse, who he was sure had come to warn him about the fire. "Do you think he'll come back tonight?" said the police officer. "I think he likes to shelter here, but I just can't have a mouse in a fruit shop." "I tell you what," said P.C. Bruce, "I've got a mouse trap back at the police office. It's one of these mouse traps that is a box, and if you put something into the trap, the mouse comes in to eat it, and then a door shuts behind them. And once I've caught the mouse, I'll take him back to the police office and let him shelter there for the whole of the winter. And it'll be nice to have a wee pet about the place." "You know," said P.C. Bruce, "my grandfather was a fire officer who was from the island of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, and he also kept pet mice. So I think I'm going to call our wee friend Harris." "What a great name," said Mr. Macduff. PC Bruce went back to the shop in the evening with the trap, and Mr. Macduff put some of his best cheese into the trap. The two men then hid, and sure enough, the wee mouse, now called Harris, came into the shop. He couldn't believe his luck. He found a gorgeous piece of cheese in the wee box, and then he went to eat it, and then the trap closed. Harris was a bit frightened because he couldn't get out, but he was reassured and happier when he heard the kindly words of the police officer speaking to him. Harris ate the cheese whilst he was on some sort of journey. He thought that he must be being taken somewhere by the kind police officer. The police car stopped, and Harris inside his trap was taken into the police office. PC Bruce very gently opened the trap, and Harris rushed out. A piece of the gorgeous cheese was sitting in a corner, and Harris quickly ate it up. PC Bruce told him that he could stay as long as he liked, and Harris, he seemed to know what he meant. PC Bruce and Harris became great friends. On Christmas Day, PC Bruce gave Harris a wee cushion to sleep on in the police office and a tiny bowl with Harris written on the side where he would put his food. Harris would still go out when the weather was good, but he would always come back in the evening to the police office. And in fact, Harris became very well known in Talaskenny, and folk would drop by the police office for a chat with PC Bruce and his wee friend. Harris was a very lucky and happy wee mouse. Harris had learnt that not all people were unfriendly, but that there were people who loved animals and would help them in whatever way they could. Mr. and Mrs. Macduff also learnt that the animals were their friends too, and they weren't nuisances to be chased away. The people of the village of Talaskenny, they also learnt a great deal from the story of Harris, and from that time on, they did all that they could in their village to give wild animals food and shelter when the winter weather came and they couldn't find any for themselves. Boys and girls, at Christmas time, as you know, we celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus. And as we grow, and no doubt as Harris grew too, he learnt lots of things. And we also learn, yes, to look after all the wild animals and not to treat them as nuisances. But like the people of Talaskenny, they also learnt to look after each other. And that was one of the greatest lessons that they could learn. Because Jesus, when he became a man, it was one of the most important things that he was to tell his followers, that they had to love one another as he loved them. And so this Christmas, I hope that you have a marvellous time, but that we can also remember the story of Harris the mouse. And as we move on from Christmas, that we will love and care for each other.